GB News because it's the people's channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
Is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
from 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello and welcome. This is Calvin's Common Sense Crusade with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson, on your TV, online and on your wireless. Today we will be discussing why the Archbishop of Canterbury is celebrating Ramadan, the current threat to Western civilization, and I'm joined by historian David Starkey to debate the colossal enigma that is Boris Johnson. Plus, in the duel, my duelists will be battling out the future of the Met Police after it was accused of being institutionally racist, sexist and homophobic. Emma Webb, your take on this?
I think that the Metropolitan Police, all the evidence suggests, is absolutely riddled with rot, but to use the term institutional is politically and ideologically loaded.
And Dennis McShane?
I don't know what institutional means. We know they're racist, we know they're misogynist, and we know also they're rotten in some other areas. They have 35,000 men. It's the biggest police force of a capital city in the world, more than the fighting soldiers in the British Army. Break it up, get it down into the community.
More of that to come, but before all of that, here's the news with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Calvin. Here's the latest from the GB Newsroom. The Statistics Watchdog says the Prime Minister used incorrect figures when discussing the asylum claims backlog. The UK Statistics Authority has written to the government saying numbers used by Rishi Sunak do not reflect official stats. It's wrong, they say, to claim that the Conservatives have halved the number of people waiting for their asylum application to be processed when the backlog has increased by 150,000 since they took office. Post office workers have been offered a 9% pay rise following a series of strikes. Members of the Communication Workers Union who work at Crown post offices have also been offered substantial lump sum payments of between £2,000 and £3,000. They'll also see an increase in paternity pay. They'll now be balloted on the deal, with the union saying it's the best that can be achieved. 2 teenage boys have been charged with the murder of a 16-year-old boy who was stabbed to death in Northampton. Rohan Shand, known as Fred, died following the attack on Wednesday afternoon. The 14 and 16-year-old boys, who can't be named for legal reasons, appeared before Northampton Magistrates Court this morning. They've been remanded in custody. The Mayor of Greater Manchester has been fined almost £2,000 after being caught driving 38 miles an hour over the speed limit. In a statement, Andy Burnham says he had to reroute when he realised his junction was closed, but he was not aware of any variable speed limit being in place. He was reportedly driving at 78 miles an hour in a 40 zone. The Mayor says he was going too fast and accepts the court's decision. At least 23 people have been killed after a major tornado hit the US state of Mississippi. It's understood that dozens have been injured and at least 4 people are still missing after the twister swept through the state and on into Alabama. The Emergency Management Agency says the storm has left a trail of damage more than 100 miles long. Residents have spoken of entire buildings left in rubble, cars turned over and trees uprooted.
Tried to get ourselves into the middle part of the house, and we did, and we got in there, and obviously it was coming right behind us, because as soon as we got in there, we heard a big boom and didn't hear anything else for a little while, so we walked out and then just came out to about 10 trees down in our yard.
Russia wants to station nuclear weapons in Belarus, according to the country's state media. President Putin says he's struck a deal to post tactical nuclear weapons within the country, which borders Ukraine. He claims it's not a violation of nuclear non-proliferation agreements, comparing it with the United States stationing nuclear weapons on the territory of its European allies. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens, so let's get back to Father Calvin.
What does a post-Christian Britain look like? Liberals argue it's a secular society free of the antiquated oppressions of religion. Conservatives might argue that we get our moral compass from Christianity, and without it, we have a limited understanding of truth, beauty, and goodness. Either way, I'm not convinced we're entering a period of agnosticism or atheism. It seems to me that as Christianity shrinks away into the corners of Western society, another faith is being promoted to take its place by default. I would argue that liberals are handing over the reins to Islam. Bradford Cathedral made the news this week for hosting a large Iftar event. Iftar is the break-fast meal of Muslims who are fasting throughout Ramadan. For a place of Christian worship to be hosting such an event will be held up by liberals as inclusive, but to Christians it may be offensive to the point of sacrilege, especially if prayers are said during these events. How Christian leaders can support the misuse of consecrated ground is beyond me. Some seem to have lost all sense of the sacred and instead focus on temporal matters, worshipping the God of diversity, inclusion and equality over our Lord and Saviour Jesus Christ. This is not the first time something like this has happened, though. It's been going on for a number of years now. St. Chad's Roman Catholic Cathedral in Birmingham was the first to do something like this outside of London when they hosted Iftar in 2018. The following year, the Bishop of London hosted an interfaith Ramadan in St. Paul's Cathedral, our mother church, alongside the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. In my opinion, there is nothing interfaith about it. It's blasphemous and a direct contradiction of the first commandment. Will mosques be hosting Easter celebrations in return? I highly doubt it. Mayor Sadiq Khan seems to embrace these opportunities, though. This week, he switched on London's first ever Ramadan lights in Piccadilly Circus. As a Christian country, we've always had Christmas lights, and I have nothing against being welcoming to people of other faiths and none. But for our capital city to be explicitly celebrating a foreign religion is like waving a white flag. Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, released a video this week greeting our Muslim sisters and brothers at the start of Ramadan. No longer defending against heresies, our spiritual leader and first among equals is now outwardly embracing heresy as if it's something to be celebrated. What makes matters worse is we're currently in the most sacred time of year for Christians. Lent and Passiontide are the reflective periods in the lead up to our holiest of holy days, Easter, when we remember the death, passion and resurrection of Jesus Christ, who died on the cross for our sins to offer us salvation. I do hope we'll see some Easter celebrations in our multicultural capital city in the coming weeks too. At the very least, we'll have some here on GB News. We have filmed a solemn Easter special, which will air on Easter Day. Let's move on to the duel between my brilliant duelists Emma Webb and Dennis McShane. A review by Baroness Louise Casey has found the Metropolitan Police to be institutionally racist, sexist and homophobic. The damning report commissioned after the Met officer Wayne Couzens abducted and murdered Sarah Everard says the force may need a complete overhaul and that public consent is broken. Well, it's time for the duel between my sidekick, Emma Webb, and this week's nemesis, former Labour MP and Minister for Europe, Dennis McShane. Emma, what does it mean to be institutionally racist?
Well, I mean, the term has ideological baggage that comes from critical theory, this idea that, you know, something can be structurally or institutionally racist to its core. And so the only way to rid it of those demons, as it were, is to dismantle the entire institution. That's the sort of critical theory understanding of what it means. But to say something is institutionally racist implies that even if you took out all of the individuals involved, the institution itself would almost be beyond reform, that nothing would change even if you removed everybody from the system. But that, of course, isn't what we're talking about when we're looking at this evidence. We're talking about particular instances that demonstrate serious rot, I think, within the Metropolitan Police. And there's no doubt about the evidence that Louise Casey has presented in her report. But I think that Mark Rowley, the Met Commissioner, is absolutely right to pull back from this conclusion that it means that the Met is institutionally racist. Because if anything, that actually hampers your ability to deal with the problem in a meaningful way, because you're focusing on this abstract institution. What does it mean? We don't know. But we can look at individual problems and how to solve them.
Dennis, is this a cop-out saying it's institutionally racist and sexist? Does that prevent them fixing the problem?
Cop-out, that's the right phrase, isn't it? No, not at all. Institutionally racist goes back to the Stephen Lawrence report. It's nothing to do with critical race theory. And actually, the biggest charge, I'd say, in the Louise Casey report is anti-women remarks or anti-religious remarks, putting a bacon in the shoe of a Muslim, Pakistani origin officer. So that is just ugly, kind of canting culture. I attended the vigil for the murder of Sarah Everard on Clapham Common. It was a dark night, but it was completely peaceful, just women. I mean, I just sort of was living quite close there, coming along, holding candles, having little speeches, and the cops smashed into the big burly men, carrying away these women by force, running their vans around Clapham Common with the sirens blurring, much noise and light as possible. I mean, this was macho canteen culture at the moment when all of London was in shock and horror that a serving police officer had murdered this woman using his warrant card to get her into his evil grips. So yes, I think, and if Mark Rowley, doesn't matter whether he says it is or isn't institutional racism, he is a product of the system. I know he's come back, I wish him well. He's not going to do it unless, as so often in the past, Mrs Thatcher did it to sort of all the fixed problems of trade unions in the city. You break it apart and you start again.
Well, Emma, no one's denying that there is racism and sexism going on in the force, to a serious degree, actually. Bacon in the shoe is horrible, but of course the death of Sarah Everard is the ultimate angle of where this ends up. But is it being introduced through Oakery? Has it been stoked on through the solutions that they've provided previously?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that whilst the police have been more performative than ever in trying to demonstrate that they're inclusive by dancing around with pride flags, by wearing high-heeled shoes, by taking the knee, all of these things that the British public have seen the police actively aligning themselves with these progressive ideological causes. But at the same time, the reality is that I'd say this is a sticking plaster, but I don't think that's the right way to phrase it. someone once said to me, if an institution or any organisation or company is virtue signalling so much, you have to ask what might they be hiding. So obviously, all of the diversity and inclusion courses in the world, all of the performativity in the world hasn't dealt with the core of the problem. I think for me, the thing that stuck out the most from this evidence that I think has really stung a lot of people was the evidence about the fridges, rape kits being left in fridges and being allowed to, basically go off so they can't be used as evidence. Someone keeping their lunchbox in a fridge with rape kit samples. I mean, this stuff is atrocious. And I mean, to say it's unprofessional doesn't even cut it. But that doesn't mean that, and yes, you said that the term institutional racism came from the start, was first used in that Macpherson report, but ultimately institutional and structural racism, whether, however you understand it, in the current context, comes with that ideological baggage. I think that the police force has all sorts of problems. I think the top-down structure, the leadership, is all wrong. We need bobbies on the beat, not people policing tweets. I think the College of Policing has an awful lot to answer for in damaging the public's trust through the introduction of things like non-crime hate incidents, which stay on people's public record and police their things that they tweet. So there is a whole host of things that has quite rightly led to a massive decline in public trust in the police force, not just the things that have been mentioned in this review. And so this is not to in any way diminish the evidence that has actually been presented in the Casey review, but to say that the police force is therefore institutionally racist, I think is just simply not helpful.
Well, I tend to agree that the moment you start using adverbs, you're beginning to lose the argument. If you add in a word that ends in ly, throw it away. As a writer, that's what I try and do. Don't always do it. They're racist, OK, misogynist, bomb out institutional. I've got no problems with that. But what are we going to do? Right. Now, I would suggest that we need an urgent commission. Maybe Emma could sit on it, and Calvin, get your dog collar back on. You should sit on it and go to other big cities in world capitals, doesn't matter where they are, Australia, New Zealand, North America, Europe, and see how they do it. Because offhand, American police force had dreadful problems 20, 30 years ago. They, on the whole, seem to have taken a really tough decisions to clean it up. One simple change is that quite a lot of forces around the world are graduate trained, just as our nurses now are graduate trained. To begin with, people say, nurses don't need to go to university.
They don't. Neither do the police.
I actually think the opposite is true. I think that we need to move away from the sort of HR approach to policing. The fact that police officers need a degree, I think, is just completely absurd. You do not need a degree to enforce the law. And in fact, what we're seeing is that in many cases, there are examples that suggest that often the police arrest people not fully understanding the law themselves, it not being entirely clear why someone is being arrested. So clearly having a degree isn't helping police officers to understand.
I tend to agree. Having been arrested once too much in my life. I'm all for the view that the police officers arrest the wrong people. Yes, I entirely agree with that line. But seriously, it's not about HR. It's about training. You
don't need a degree for that.
We don't need a degree. We need an awful lot of training. We don't, on the whole, in other professions, many of which are still male-dominated, macho, lots of old traditions, have similar stories. It seems to be unique to the English police and unique to the Metropolitan Police.
I would suggest some of the training is part of the problem. So if we look at the evidence from the report, there's some snobbery in there. So one particular police officer complained that he'd have to know more than one language to go for a job that he wanted to go for. He'd be denied a job if he didn't speak more than one language. Now, to me, that's discrimination. But it suggests...
Everybody's in the cabinet. They can hardly speak English. I mean, let alone a second.
But surely an English police officer in an English city should not be required to speak a second language.
I'd love to know. That's just... I've been arguing all my political life that, yes, we should learn to speak one or two other languages in our beloved country. Stop thinking English is the only language in the world.
It's not, but it is our language, Dennis. Well, let's see what the Metropolitan Police Commissioner said. Sir Mark Rowley issued this statement via Twitter. Baroness Casey's report sparks feelings of shame and anger, but it also increases our resolve. We've let people down. I'm sorry. It must be a catalyst for police reform. Well, many thanks to my duelists, Emma Webb and Dennis McShane. Now, my Calvin's Concern Twitter poll this week is, As Macron cancels King Charles's state visit, are the French revolting again? Yes or no? You tell me. This is your final call to get your votes in on our Twitter poll. Head to GB News on Twitter and keep your comments coming in, and we'll be discussing this topic later on in the show. Plenty more to come this evening on my Common Sense Crusade. Next up, it's Behind the Headline with the legendary historian and broadcaster, Dr. David Starkey. This week, he's picking apart Partygate and Boris Johnson. Don't go away.
On Mark Dolan tonight, is the Home Secretary Suella Braverman right to accommodate asylum seekers on ferries? In my big opinion, the protests by the French this weekend are there to challenge the tyranny of the elite. People power may just save the free world. In my take at 10, political correctness is killing TV entertainment. Go woke, no joke. Plus 3 top pundits, including radio legend Diddy David Hamilton. And the growing scandal of vaccine injuries. Plus tomorrow's Sunday papers. See you at 9.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "No, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Boris Johnson faced a grilling by the Privileges Committee this week to determine whether he recklessly or intentionally misled Parliament over Partygate. Johnson denies wrongdoing, and our very own Jacob Rees-Mogg has suggested the animus against Boris could be politically motivated, and that the liberal media and political classes still haven't given him a break and forgiven him over Brexit. I spoke with broadcaster and historian David Starkey about this story. Here's what he had to say. Why do you think this term recklessly was introduced? it seems possible that he could have recklessly but unintentionally misled them, and that surely this isn't as bad as lying, which would require intention.
I'm afraid I am very firmly on Jacob Rees-Mogg's side on this. I think that the entire proceedings of the committee, I wouldn't call them a kangaroo court, but they are a political court. In other words, this is an action which has been taken against Boris, frankly, as an act of vengeance. It's draped in the language of propriety, of protecting parliamentary procedure, and so on. But really, it is no more and no less than an attempt at going back to the Middle Ages. And when a minister fell, he was impeached, attended, his head was cut off, and he was stripped of his property. And this is a version of that. Interestingly enough, it's exactly what's happening in America at the moment with Trump. The attack on Trump, remember, which has none of the dignity of, oh dear me, of Harriet Harman. I'm afraid the key figure is a figure just about as remote from dear, boring, uptight, throttled Harriet as possible. It is, of course, Stormzy Daniels. But the attempt at, as it were, putting Trump in cuffs, doing the perp walk, humiliating him, trying to exclude him from office. This seems to me to be a fundamental step backwards. We're seeing a everybody talks reverently about the separation of powers. I don't particularly believe in it, but what we're doing, and the whole proceedings of this Commons Committee demonstrated, we're increasingly confusing justice with politics. And this is a deadly thing to do. The whole operation of an honest politics in which you can make a mistake, you can be punished for it by the electorate, but you don't suffer anything else, is the foundation of not liberal democracy. In Britain, it happens much earlier than that. It happens in the early 18th century. It's the foundation of an essentially liberal, responsible system of government in which you separate criminal penalties from the penalties of failure. And it's immensely important that we distinguish between those. And it seems to me there's been a deliberate attempt with these proceedings at actually bringing those two things together and draping what is a nakedly political trial in a pretense of defending political morality. And that, is a really dishonest, that's much more dishonest and much more damaging than Boris. Because the final point, and it's one that Jacob, whom I do not always agree with, has also made, this leads to tit for tat. This has been done against somebody on the right. At the earliest opportunity, it will be done against somebody on the left. I know. I study the reign of Henry VIII, when this sort of thing was the poison, the destructive element of a politics which otherwise tried to be reasonable and one of debate. The moment you introduce punishment, criminal punishment for political failure, you are lost.
Well, I think you're right to draw comparisons between what's going on in America and what's going on over here. And I think you're also right in that this seems to be more of a political trial than a seeking of justice. But what is the motivation behind it, David?
Well, I think it's the one that you've indicated, that this is the vengeance of a particular political class, that Boris, the one unquestioned achievement that Boris has, is at least he technically carried out Brexit. And he did so, of course, essentially by breaking the power of that political class, which had established a throttle-like grip on Parliament.
You're saying he didn't.
Well, that was historian and broadcaster Dr. David Starkey on the Boris Johnson Partygate hearing. You can watch the full version of that interview on YouTube. Well, to my dualists, Emma, do you think Boris Johnson is being set up by political opponents and the MSM?
I wouldn't be surprised if Boris Johnson really genuinely does believe that when he made those comments to Parliament that he wasn't intentionally misleading the House. I think that actually the whole focus on this, I think Jacob Rees-Mogg's comments were bang on, that he said that, Tony Blair and his responsibility for the Iraq War was never hauled before anything over that, whereas Boris Johnson is in trouble for looking at some cake. I'm not necessarily going so far as to diminish the fact that probably they broke rules, but I think the whole thing is a red herring. I think that we should be focusing on getting accountability for the fact that these rules are imposed on us in the first place, not focusing on the fact that Boris Johnson may or may not have been uncertain as to whether or not he kept rules that no human being could reasonably have kept.
I mean, we shouldn't have had the rules in the first place, but you're right, he didn't keep them. But is it being blown out of proportion, Dennis? Because Tony Blair didn't get a hearing as severe as what Boris Johnson received. And also, Matt Hancock is responsible for the care home situation and Midazolam and all of that, and he's barely had a look in.
I'm not remotely interested in Matt Hancock. I do know, because I was a minister in the Foreign Office during the Iraq War, that no Prime Minister has been put through the ringer so regularly. I mean, some of you are a bit young. I mean, Blair had so many inquiries, so many accusations.
Quite right, too.
Absolutely correctly. A huge Chilcot inquiry, much, much bigger than any of the... We haven't had the reports of the COVID inquiry or what Sue Gray reported, what the police reported. I just think there are 2 points about Boris. I mean, I've known him all my life. I wrote a piece a few weeks ago saying, no point calling Boris Johnson a liar. I mean, on his own terms, he isn't. He never has been. He just doesn't know what the truth is.
You can't be a liar if you don't know what the truth is.
and it's part of his charm. I mean, ask all the women he's left behind and moved on to. I mean, this is our Johnson. And it's Tory MPs who kicked him out. It's Daily Telegraph and the Daily Mail that destroyed him last summer. You've got 2 big things happen this week. Number one, there was a big vote on the Northern Irish Protocol, the so-called Windsor Framework. Boris appealed to all Tory MPs. There were 365 elected with him. Thanks to him, he would say in 2019, just 21 went into the lobby with him. And then the next day, on BBC One's Question Time, Fiona Bruce asked the audience in a middle-class part of the country, hands up anybody who thinks Boris Johnson tells the truth.
Yeah, but I mean, that's a BBC audience, isn't it?
No. It is very carefully picked apart. I know the efforts parties take to ensure that they get their share of the audience, and you're quite right. I mean, you're quite wrong, Calvin. For once, normally you're right. You're not wearing a dog collar. So
I know.
And I mean, Boris is over now. I mean, OK. I mean, amazing career and lasted so long. He's Prime Minister. You will have people like my friend Ben Habib on this show. You'll have Richard Tice on this show. Nigel Farage has got his own programme. They all think that far from getting Brexit done, Boris has imposed a deal on us that changes even more strongly to the EU.
Don't you think that this is a profound waste of taxpayers' money, of resources, of parliamentary time, focusing on Boris Johnson?
Is it because the globalist coup is not quite over and they think there's a chance that Boris Johnson could get back in? They really wanted Rishi Sunak in. You know, they weren't happy that Liz Truss got in democratically, so they booted her out too. And they've got Rishi in, and now they're worried that Boris could come back. Is that what it is?
I don't know. I think that, and I don't think that there's necessarily a kind of conspiracy pushing behind this. I think that part of this might just be, as you see in many other issues, I think that Parliament is sort of bumbles along, focusing on all the wrong things and never focusing on the right things. So this isn't out of the blue.
Well, there's
in that
no conspiracy.
respect.
Can you see the parallels between what's going on with Trump in America?
Perhaps. But I don't know. I don't know enough about American politics.
France is, we've been looking at France a lot this week. France is a monarchy, an autocratic monarch. Currently, they're elected of the last couple of 100 years, but basically it's still a monarchy tempered by the anger of the street. We're a parliamentary democracy. Parliament means speaking, parley, talking, and we get out all our anger and hates in Parliament. But the absolute core principle is people getting up on their feet in the Commons have got to speak the truth. And I'm afraid, as I say, I don't blame Boris. I mean, you're asking somebody who's a snooker player to sort of become a rugby star. It's just not in his nature.
It's symptomatic of the general decline of, you mentioned Parliament, it's the decline of communication within Parliament in general. The level of scrutiny over any legislation that is going through the House is extremely poor. The calibre of parliamentary discussion is incredibly poor. And I'm pretty sure that if you can say that Boris Johnson doesn't know what the truth is, I'm sure that there are many, many examples of other people within both houses who don't really know what the truth is.
Well, be very careful, Emma. That is what, with respect, people have said over the years. I'm just reading a giant 7-volume, about 10,000-page biography of Mussolini. That's all he ever said. The parliamentarians are stupid. They're following orders. They don't pay any attention. We have to have a new order in Italy. Be very careful before we rip to shreds.
I think there's a very big difference between...
There is something to be said about that, because the point that David Starkey made is that they made the executive much smaller, and the parliamentary challenge wasn't there, which is what led us to the mess that we're in right now, I think. Anyway, plenty more to come on this evening on my Common Sense Crusade. After the break, is Western civilization under threat? Don't go away, BRB.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now? Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back to the Common Sense Crusade with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson, on your TV, online and on your wireless. Now, you really hear the use of the phrase the West associated with much positivity these days, and yet isn't there much cause for its historical celebration? A new documentary entitled The West premieres tomorrow evening on YouTube in a bid to convey the core story of the civilization that shaped the modern world. It's the proud work of the New Culture Forum, and senior and presenter Mark Sidwell joins me to explain more. Mark, it's not tomorrow night, it's tomorrow morning, isn't it?
It's tomorrow morning, yes, 9:30, but 9:30 crucially in the morning. But of course, it's on YouTube, so you'll be able to watch it at whichever time you like. Right. 9:30 in the evening would also work.
Including our international viewers as well. But Mark, why is the West under threat?
The West has been under threat, I think, particularly since the end of the Cold War. You know, the idea of the West during the Cold War, you saw Thatcher, you saw President Reagan, both using the West to rally us together to fight the fight we needed to do against communism. But at the end of the Cold War, we suddenly forgot about it. We became worried that it wasn't very inclusive, that it was something that perhaps we should move away from. And as a result, we lost touch with the achievements of the West and really started to only remember, the imperfections and the crimes. And so what I wanted to do with this series is to restore a truer and fuller version of that narrative and really bring it, to a new audience with new technology. Yeah. Because it's something that I think people who are growing up, post the 80s when I was growing up, just haven't had access to.
I like what you're doing, and I can't wait to see it. And, Nigel Bigger has done something similar, presenting a more holistic approach to the empire in his book. But my question is it too late? Is the West already falling? Is it crumbling apart around us and too late to stop it?
It's never too late with the West. That's one thing I've found and discovered even more than I thought in researching this. It reminds me of how many traumas the West has been through and the incredible dynamism it has within itself, the restlessness, the reinventing that it constantly is doing, which of course can look like trouble all the time. The West never looks sort of secure, but at the same time, it's always ready to come round the corner again. This year we're going to see Notre Dame in Paris getting its spire back. It's going to be reopening next year. There's always things coming through.
I like the positivity. You mentioned that originally we were fighting communism. We seem to have won that battle, well, so to speak. I mean, Marxism has reared its head again, but in a different form. What is the enemy of the West now? Is it wokeism? Is it Islam? Where is the battle lines being drawn?
I would say it's external. And in particular, I would say the forces of China and Russia, which really show us an alternative to the West. I think in the face of those sorts of forces, you can't say, oh, well, it's just everything is modernity and getting wealthy. You can get wealthy like China's got wealthy, and that's nothing like the West. But against those external forces, it's the internal trouble we're facing with the wokeness, the attacks, which really do come down to attacks on the West. They really begin with, say, the late 80s when Stanford gets rid of its requirement to study Western civilization, its most popular course, because it's decided that this is now racist, this is now colonialist, that we can't talk about it. Yeah. When you stop talking about those things, that's when you end up banning free speech, and all the sort of lockdowns that we're having is because people have lost touch with the principles. So we need to return to the source, as it were.
Well, the source is Christianity, is it not? Is it not because we've lost our faith that we've lost our confidence in the West?
Well, let me recommend to you, Calvin, episode 2 of The West, which is covering Christianity in great depth, although you will also find it mentioned at the end of episode 1, just to sort of whet your appetite.
Well, give us a brief. What is Western values? What are Western values to you?
What I say in the series is in many ways, it's the triumph of the individual, but it's the individual moralised by Christianity. So that we have this tremendous concern for the poor and the weak, for the outsiders, but we also have this sort of energised sense that we're going to look at the vision we have and try and make the world more like that. We sort of see the world from the outside in that way. This is Professor Lawrence Mead's idea, and I think it's a very convincing account of what the distinctive factor in the West is.
OK, Mark, I've got my nemesis here, Dennis, who I can see shivering every time I mention Christianity as being the forefront of Western values.
No, on the contrary, I regard faith as very, very important, undervalued in politics and understudied at our universities. But I'm a bit nervous of it simply because I come from an Irish and a Polish background, and my goodness, God isn't really an Englishman, Mark. But if you talk to any Irishman about the Protestant supremacism in Ireland over centuries and just still lingering there a little bit with the DUP, Catholic supremacy, very, very sort of ugly phenomenon as well. And of course, the one group that all the Christian supremacists could unite in denigrating were the Jews, culminating in what happened, and still a lot of anti-Semitism around. Now we have in our country, Europe, an awful lot of Muslims. What are we going to do? Christianise them?
That's a good question. Should we be evangelising the incoming tide?
Well, as a Christian, of course, I think that we should be spreading the truth of the gospel to people. Of course, I mean, this is one of the reasons why I doubt many of the senior clergy in the Church of England, is because if you don't want to evangelise, and it suggests that you probably don't believe that what you believe in is the truth and the ultimate truth. But that's not to say that you don't respect other people and you don't respect their right to freedom of religion and freedom of expression and freedom of conscience. So I think that those things are often conflated, which makes people feel very sort of heebie-jeebie about even mentioning the truth at all. But I had the great pleasure of being interviewed by Mark for this documentary, and I would have seen the whole thing on the premiere if it wasn't for the fact that I came to do Jacob Rees-Mogg's show on the same night. But I saw the introduction to it, and it's absolutely phenomenal. So everybody should go and watch it tomorrow.
There you go. Watch Mark Sidwell's documentary on YouTube on the New Culture Forum channel tomorrow morning. Emma Webb and Dennis McShane, thank you so much for being my duelists this evening, my sidekick and my nemesis, and we'll have more of that next week. Before we take a final break, let's have a look at what you guys have been saying about today's topics. Carol says, historically, there's always been mistrust. France and the UK will never be friends. Macron is the main hurdle to Brexit. Controversial take. Anna says, we should have done the same, but we rolled over. In terms of what? We should have done the same what? If you're talking about telling the king not to visit France, I'm dubious about that, because the threats were reminding him of the guillotine, and we should remind the French that he's our king, not theirs. Anyway, commenting on another topic we're discussing today, Justin Welby, celebrating Ramadan, one viewer says, I hope everyone commenting goes to church and does what they can to save their culture and native values. Otherwise, it's pointless complaining. That is the key. Whoever you are, anonymous viewer, that is the key. If you want to save our churches, if you want to save our culture, go to church on Sunday. It's as simple as that. Then they won't be closed down or turned into mosques. Valerie says, wonderful that everyone can come together in celebration. When I was a vicar, Hindus and Muslims often came into church to pray because they saw it as a holy place. Well, unless they're praying to the one true God, it's not appropriate for them to be praying in your church. I would say that's dangerous. Anyway, coming up, we'll be discussing how the Archbishop of Canterbury is celebrating Ramadan. See you in a few minutes.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching. Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle.
Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. My Calvin's Concern Twitter poll this week was, as Macron cancels King Charles' state visit, are the French revolting again? A vast number of the comments replied saying the French are always revolting and have always been revolting. So thank you for that. 88.1% of you said yes, while 11.9% of you said no. Interesting stuff. It wasn't very nice to see the Bordeaux town hall on flames. It seems like the French are taking this protest into a riot, so prayers for them. Finally, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, has addressed the Muslim community at the start of Ramadan. Let's take a look.
I give special thanks to Muslim communities who have pioneered the generous practice of holding community iftars on a particular day during the time of Ramadan. The Ramadan Tent Project and the Naz Legacy are just 2 organisations that have done exemplary work in opening iftars up to a wider public. Last year, I enjoyed the great hospitality of an iftar with the Muslim Association of Nigeria here in South London. Local churches joined in, and it was a memorable evening.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined by academic and fellow from the Henry Jackson Society, Wasik Wasik. Now, Wasik, we've been friends on Twitter for a long time, so it's good to finally meet you in person.
Absolutely.
Thank you for coming on.
No worries.
Am I being oversensitive here? Is it strange for an Archbishop of Canterbury to be celebrating Ramadan?
I think there is something strange about that. I think the Archbishop needs to make a distinction between what his faith is and what other people's faiths are. And there's nothing wrong with obviously congratulating Muslims for holding community events like the Iftar, but I think he needs to really focus on his own religion and his own constituents, in my view.
Well, it's Lent. It's the most holy time of year for Christians. I haven't seen him spend much time talking about Easter. It seems strange to me that he spent a long time giving a special mention to people like the Ramadan Tent Project, which we know even the Labour Party distanced itself from. Keir Starmer pulled out of an Iftar in 2021 with the Ramadan Tent Project because they praise Cage, who we know have been accused of being terrorist sympathisers.
Well, yes, absolutely. And I think he needs to really do his due diligence when it comes to some of these groups that have sympathies towards those who are looking to destabilise the West and Christian values, particularly here in Britain. And I don't think it really reflects well on him to be associated with organisations like that.
Well, we've also seen Iftar celebrations in cathedrals up and down the country. Now, I see that as offensive as a Christian because I think it's sacrilege of consecrated ground. But would you not see that as offensive as a Muslim because there are images in these cathedrals of people that you wouldn't worship?
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of Muslims don't actually like iconography, so they don't, worship Jesus or like seeing Jesus on the cross or anything like that. Particularly when it comes to other prophets, like the most valued of ours is Muhammad, peace be upon him. So we've seen the reactions when those images are there, so it seems a bit bizarre to then hold iftars in cathedrals.
Right. I mean, what would your reaction be, for example, if we said, let's have an Easter celebration in a mosque?
I mean, personally, I wouldn't... it just wouldn't seem appropriate in my view. I think the religions need to be distinct. There is a distinction between them. We believe Jesus to be a prophet, whereas Christians believe Jesus to be the Son of God and God himself, and that's absolutely fine. But to contaminate the beliefs together seems to be a bit odd in my view.
I'm so thankful that you said that, because I get a lot of Muslims messaging me, quite nice people messaging me, saying, we believe the same thing. We believe in the same God. We also think Christ was a prophet. I'm like, no, I don't think Christ was a prophet. I think he's a prophet, king and priest. I think he is God himself, man incarnate, truly man, truly God. Like, there's a clear distinction there. Is this wokeness that we're trying to merge Islam and Christianity together in order to look inclusive and welcoming? Yeah,
I do think there is an element to this inclusivity. I don't think Christians particularly need to be watering down their faith to appease other faiths. I mean, I think you know this quite well. Christianity, or Christians at least, are declining so much so in the West by, I think they're now 40% of the population. So, you know, not even half of the population are now Christians. And we see that the wokeness is actually infiltrating into the faith, and the priorities of the church seem to be elsewhere rather than on the core beliefs of what they should be focusing on.
Well, my critics would say this is not appeasement, this is good community values, this is people getting on together, interfaith relationships. What would you say to that?
Well, I don't think you need to use your faith to have good relations with communities. We're able to do that without having to use our faith as a way of doing it. We have British values, we have free speech, we have liberty, we have the rule of law. These are all good ways of building a cohesive society.
Yeah. So how will you be celebrating Ramadan or taking part in Ramadan this year?
Well, I'm fasting all throughout. I've just had some water before I came here. Thank you so much for providing that. And I can see there's some Krispy Kremes there, so I'm going to be obviously tucking into those.
Give my secrets away. I've got a stash of donuts under here. But if I was to offer you one of those donuts, would that be an offence?
No, absolutely not. Because how would you know that I'm a Muslim? How would you know that I'm fasting? And even if you did know that I was a Muslim, you wouldn't still know that I'm fasting. And it's okay. It happens. So what?
I mean, it's Lent right now, so I'm also fasting in a different way. But I remember during my teacher training, they really laid into us and said, to be inclusive, you have to really make sure that you don't do anything that another faith would do. So if it is Ramadan, it doesn't matter what your religion is, you can't offer other kids chocolates or sweets or anything, just in case they happen to be Muslim. I'm like, are we not overriding British values with other values in order to try and be inclusive? That is not welcoming. That's not bringing people in. That's replacing, surely.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we don't want to prevent ourselves from interacting with other people because we might feel that we could offend them. And that's not how society works. So sometimes people are going to get offended and sometimes they're not. We're just never going to know. We just have to just be ourselves, and that's what being British is.
Well, I think we're a good sign of an interfaith relationship.
Absolutely.
We're a good sign of community. So, Wasik, thank you so much.
No worries, Calvin.
God bless you. That was academic and fellow from the Henry Jackson Society, Wasik. So thank you for your time today. Each week we end the show on our closing prayer, and today is Lady Day. So here is the collect for the Annunciation of our Lord to the Blessed Virgin Mary. We beseech thee, O Lord, pour thy grace into our hearts, that as we have known the incarnation of thy Son, Jesus Christ, by the message of an angel, so by his cross and passion we may be brought unto the glory of his resurrection through the same Jesus Christ our Lord. You have been watching Calvin's Common Sense Crusade with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson. I hope you enjoyed the new show. We're no longer on Sundays. I will be back with you next Saturday at 7 p.m. I'd like to say a special thank you to my producer, Paul Sapper, who has worked very, very hard. He left us this week, but he still came in after the days that he'd already resigned and helped build the show for today. So thank you so much for you, and God bless you. Next up, it's the Saturday 5, brand new show, very exciting. Before that, here is the weather and a promo. Deus Vult. Have a good one. God bless.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, from 9:30 on Sunday morning when Sir Ian Duncan-Smith gives me his verdict on Brexit and Boris. I'll also be asking Labour's Lucy Powell about Keir Starmer's tax return and pension plan. And Sammy Wilson joins me from Belfast to reveal whether the DUP will go back to power sharing after the Windsor Framework passed through the Commons. All that and more with me, Camilla Tominey, this Sunday morning from 9:30.
Hello again. We have some pretty wet and windy weather spreading across southern parts as we go through tonight. Elsewhere, yes, there'll be some showery rain around, but in the north it's frost and ice. That's perhaps a bigger cause for concern. Taking a look at the bigger picture, and you can see this area of low pressure, and it's this that's going to track its way across the south, bringing some pretty unsettled weather as we go through Saturday night into Sunday morning. Taking a closer look at the detail, and some rain spilling up from the southwest, spreading across much of central southern England and Wales as we go through the night. A little bit of uncertainty as to just how far north that rain's going to make it, but it could be pretty heavy for some of us, perhaps up to 30 millimetres in a few spots. In the north, we've got a cold northerly wind, and so temperatures dropping, perhaps even some wintry showers bring some sleet or snow here, but a milder start in the south on Sunday morning. Through Sunday itself then, yes, cloudy and wet first thing in the south, but that rain is gradually going to clear its way. And so as we head into the afternoon, it will be drier, albeit staying quite cloudy here. Some bright or sunny spells likely further north, particularly across parts of Scotland, but also some showers to watch out for. These could be a bit wintry at times. Notice those temperatures markedly down compared to what we saw on Saturday, though perhaps a little bit milder in the southwest, could get to highs of 12 or 13. As we go through the end of the day on Sunday, we are going to see most of the cloud and those showers clearing away, so a largely dry and clear picture through Sunday night. That, combined with that cold northerly flow, does mean temperatures are going to take quite a drop. Perhaps a touch of frost in prone spots towards more southern parts, but further north, the frost on Monday morning is going to be quite widespread and harsh, with some icy patches to watch out for as well. Through Monday itself then, yes, a cold, frosty start for many of us, but actually it's going to be a generally fine day. Lots of sunshine to be had.